a number of topics over here. We want to discuss why migrate, first of all, and then we also want to go through kind of step by step on all of the major differences between the various versions. One of the most important things that I want to discuss here is the migration philosophy. What do we believe as our philosophy in terms of migration? What is, and because that will impact in terms of how it actually, how the applications are migrated. Finally, we want to give you a quick demo and then answer any questions here. First of all, why migrate? Migrate, if you notice that one of the new things that we have released recently is version 7.0, and we believe this version 7.0 is a game changer. And specifically, the reason why we believe this is a game changer is because the last mile is a breeze. The last 15 or 20% that you used to have to go in and make code customizations is now extremely easy. There are two things that we have released recently that actually make this into a game changer. Version 6.0 and 6.1 and 6.2 introduce the concept of a spreadsheet grid for layout customizations. The spreadsheet grid fundamentally changed the way that you actually customize the layout. You know, if you are used to some of the older ways and older technologies of customizing the layout, I mean, believe me, when I was actually customizing and doing some development in days past, you had to deal with all of this alignment of these controls. You had to deal with positioning of these controls. You had to deal with essentially making sure that these controls are, you know, lining up in the right place and making sure that, you know, they are hooked up properly to the back end of the database and so on. Now with the combination of the toolbox where you have pre-bound controls and the combination of the spreadsheet grid, which allows you to make the layout customizations and preserves those customizations, it is actually a breeze now. The second, and probably the even more important game-changing feature in version 7.0, introduced in version 7.0, is the feature that we call formulas. Formulas is where you can make most of the things that required code customizations can now be done with formulas. Previously, for example, one of the code customizations that we used to have an entire webinar on called the make, model, year, which are the dependent drop-downs, you know, we had an entire webinar on it. Now we can do that in about 5 minutes effectively and does not require a single line of code customization, does not require, you know, any, you know, it replaces 300 lines of code with just a few formulas that you can use in order to accomplish that. So I just want to give you a quick demo of this thing if you haven't already seen version 7.0. Here's an application that was developed in version 7.0, and you're looking at it in my browser over here. We're looking at a standard Southwind database with a customer's table over here as an example, right? Let me switch over to IronSpeed Designer version 7.0 over here, and I'm looking at the same Show Customers page, but in my spreadsheet grid effectively. The spreadsheet grid allows me to zoom in and zoom out into a different level of my page at any given point in time. So I'm looking, if I go to the right-hand side and I look at the tree that shows the different zoom areas, I'm now focused on the fields area. I can change it back to, like, for example, look at the filters area where I can see the search control, the email address filter, and the company name filter. This corresponds to, if you will, this area at the top where you're seeing the search, the email address, and the company name. But if I want to see the rows, then I can go to the customer fields area and look at the column heading and each one of the rows that correspond to that. So I have the ability to first zoom in and zoom out into a different area. Next thing that I can do is I can go through any of these cells as an example and treat it very much like what I would do in Microsoft Excel, where I could go in basically and then go to the cell editor and say, you know what, I want to change the background color of this thing in the cell editor to a different color. So I can say, okay, set the background color to, let's say, yellow as an example. If I just do something as simple as that, now I had no need to understand how to use HTML. I did not need to figure out, what are the different tags that need to specify the HTML, or did not need to modify any CSS style or anything like that. I simply went in and used some of the features of the editor that you're familiar with, very much similar to Microsoft Word, for example, and was able to actually do that. Similarly, what I can do is go through and make any changes that I want. Let's say, for example, in my case, I have some data over here. Let's say, for example, I have data for sales representative, and I want to highlight all sales representatives in red as an example. I can go through back to the formula editor over here for contact title, and I can write a simple if statement, right mouse click, select my functions, select the logical functions, select if, for example, for my section over here, and then I can specify a true and false condition in here. So I could say something like, if sales representative is equal to, contact title is equal to sales representative, I would like to do the following, which is I would like to display this in red. So in this case, what I can say, font color equal to red, and then concatenate that with the contact title itself, and then end my font tag effectively. So this is how easy it is for me to actually go through and specify a color of red, for example, for my contact title. Now if I go ahead, save this, build and run, my contact name column should be yellow, and hopefully if everything works right, my contact title should be in red if it is equal to sales representative. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Now, this obviously is a very, very simple example, but you can see the power behind this example, the power of effectively being able to change the layout and to change the effectively the code customization, if you will, by using the formulas without having to write a single line of code effectively. So here it is, my application that comes up effectively in there. Can you see the app? Okay, great. So you can see the contact name basically column showing in yellow, and the contact title showing up in red, for example. So that's how easy it is for me to make code customization and layout customization changes. And that's why I said the last mile is truly a breeze in order to actually build your applications with the spreadsheet grid and with the layout customization. Going back to our presentation over here and continuing on the migration thing. Now, obviously, when you do want to migrate, you want to first step back and ask yourself a number of questions. What is your goal? Is the goal basically you are extending an application, or you're just simply trying to move it to the latest version so that you do not get orphaned, as an example? Now, based on what your goal is, you may want to use different strategies in terms of migration. So that's why we want to essentially ask ourselves that question. How many customizations do you have? One of the important things that you want to ask is, what kind of code customizations did you implement? For example, are the customizations that you implemented are being replaced by new features that are introduced in version 7.0, and do you really want to carry those code customizations forward or not? Do you want to essentially ditch them and then implement the same thing in a new version or not? For example, the example that I gave earlier about make, model, year, you will realize that it is much easier to do it in version 7.0 now. And if you had such a customization, the question you should basically analyze and do is to see whether you want to preserve that or whether you want to continue replace it with the new formulas. So one of the things that I always recommend is taking an inventory of your application. You know, how many pages do you have? What are the code customizations that you have made? What are the layout customizations that you have made? So at least on a piece of paper, you've got essentially an inventory of that application, and so that you can take a look at it. Another reason to migrate that you want to make sure that you review the version history page to see when is the support ending on an earlier release, for example. we typically support a release for about 2 to 3 years approximately. So once that period has come in terms of support, we will no longer offer support for that particular release after that support period ends. However, you can, of course, continue to use it. There's nothing wrong with you continuing to use it, but we may not be able to support that particular release going forward. So that's another reason why you want to effectively make sure that you are migrating your application over here. Now let's go through each one of these things in a little bit more detail and make sure that we've got the entire picture of migration here before we proceed. In terms of the goal, let's find out what you're trying to do. Let's say you've got a 1,000-page application in your case. Are you interested in simply adding 2 or 3 pages or modifying 2 or 3 pages, or do you want to essentially say, hey, you know what, I've got to have a major thing that I'm building effectively? The reason I ask this question is because in some cases, what you may want to do in terms of your strategy, you've got two or three different strategies that you have available. You can leave the application in the older version, you can migrate it into the newer version, or you can build the application completely in the new version. And depending on where you are in your scope of these kind of things, you may choose one of the other strategy effectively. And that's why I ask whether you're planning incremental changes. You want to leave the 1,000 pages as is, or leave 997 of them as is, and only modify 3 pages as an example, right? And if that's what your goal is, then your strategy may be slightly different effectively. And certainly, if you want to take advantage of new features, another new feature that we introduced in version 7.0 is the ability to generate SharePoint applications. SharePoint applications obviously can be generated with version 7.0, but if you have older applications that you want to migrate into SharePoint, it may or may not be possible depending on where you were, and may be better off essentially recreating the application very quickly as well. Okay. The other question to ask is, what is, and this is what I say to take in an inventory of your application, which is your application mostly out of the box, or does it have many layout and code customizations that you made in HTML earlier on in version 5.x or version 4.x effectively? Obviously, the more out of the box it is, the more the easier it is to migrate, but also at the same time, because it's mostly out of the box, it may be actually easier for you to simply recreate that application, because really in that way, there is really, you haven't actually made a whole bunch of layout or code customizations, so it is as easy for you to create that application completely new rather than actually migrating that application, because then from that perspective, you have fewer headaches to worry about in terms of retesting the application, revalidating all of the features effectively, right? So the more customizations that you have, the more you have invested in that application, the more you want to migrate effectively that application, the less you have in terms of the customization that you have made, the easier it may be for you to simply recreate that application in there. So take an inventory. Once you have that inventory, then you can essentially gauge what is required effectively in doing that. As I mentioned to you, the new features have replaced old customizations. And so one of the things that you want to do is take advantage of the new features, because you don't want to be continuing code, maintaining code that may be in an older version, because it's much easier for you to maintain the more recent versions of the code, and we can help you migrate that very, very easily. Just so that you have the full picture, just so that we do not just give you guidance to effectively just migrate, and nothing else, I do want to talk about alternatives to migration. There are alternatives to migration. Obviously, the obvious thing is that, hey, if it is working and if it is working just fine, why bother? Why change? What is the need for actually migrating? Is it that something you're really trying to change because of some of the other reasons over here, or do you just want to migrate for the sake of migration, for the sake of keeping up to date? So migration does not necessarily mean that you migrate effectively every application. In some cases, you may want to decide that you leave the application as is, just so that, I'm giving you the full picture over here. There's also an alternative strategy that many customers have employed, and that is to essentially side-by-side applications. So what they really do effectively is they have multiple versions of their applications where new features are essentially deployed in the latest version of Iron Speed Designer. So, it's App 1, App 2, App 3, App 4 running side by side. They have a common menu in the sense that the menu items are exactly the same, but the menu itself may not be shared across the applications. So that effectively from the end user's perspective, there is really no difference in terms of look and feel of the application or in terms of menu items and so on. In some cases, if they select menu item 37, it goes to app 4, but if they selected menu item 22, it goes to app 1 as an example. So that's another way for you to essentially have a gradual migration available to you rather than effectively migrate the entire older application together. Again, this is in terms of full disclosure, just to make sure that you've got all of the alternatives available to you so that you don't have to jump into migration just for the sake of migration. But nevertheless, we do, of course, recommend that you migrate to the latest version. Let's talk about features that impact migration. The reason we want to talk about the features that impact migration is because they may have a significant impact on your application. Now, in version 3.x or earlier, which was about 5 years old approximately, you will notice that our code model that we generated was completely different, and the page layout model was completely different. So if you've got essentially a version 3.x application or earlier, our strong recommendation is that you create a new application for a variety of reasons. Version 3.x was probably in .NET 1.1 application. .NET 2.0 had not come out or was coming out at that point in time. Also, many things have changed. Almost every one of the code customizations that you probably implemented in that version 3.x has been now implemented in some way or the other as a feature in Iron Speed Designer, or is much easier to do using formulas. So that's what our recommendation for 3.x applications are. Version 4.x, which is also about 3 to 4 years old, is using the same code model. Code model in the sense that, the same essentially the calling patterns effectively. It doesn't necessarily mean that, more things haven't been added in version 5, 6, and 7, but the code model is the same. And because the code model is the same, your code customizations should transfer without modification to version 7.0. No changes required over there. Now, certainly, as we talked about earlier, there may be a need for you to essentially, you might say, hey, listen, I can ditch that old customization and do it in a simpler way in version 7.0. So that obviously is available in here. Now, version 4.x did differ in one significant way in version 7.0, which is the different page layout model. We used to use the old HTML editor. Now, obviously, we're using a spreadsheet grid. One of the reasons why we went away from the HTML editor was the HTML editor effectively gave you the flexibility of, actually 2 reasons why we went away. One reason was that HTML editor allowed you to, of course, customize it at the HTML level. So you had to know HTML in order to do that. But the downside of it was that when you did customize the HTML, the problem was that it was very difficult for us to migrate because we did not know which lines were added by you and which lines were originally generated by us effectively. And merging your changes to an existing page was extremely, extremely difficult. The spreadsheet grid saves your page model in an XML layout at a cell level. So we can effectively migrate your application very easily because we know exactly at the cell level what the changes have been made effectively, and we can essentially parse that and migrate that without any problem. So we can essentially merge your changes without any problem. That's one of the biggest changes that was made in version 6.x when we introduced the spreadsheet grid. But these are the two major changes in version 4.x to 7.0. Version 5.x continued on essentially the same code model, but it did add Ajax and updated page styles and design themes. So the couple of reasons for you to migrate version 5.x applications over or version 4.x applications over is because if you did custom implementations to make your look and feel different, now you could have taken advantage of additional features. 5.1 and 5.2 added a few additional features here that also impact migration. Obviously, if you're using older versions, you did not have the access to multi-level menus. You just had tabs. Now you added multi-level menus and rich text editor and a sign-in bar in the header, as well as many new page types and tab panels. So now, obviously, if you've got an older application, you can take advantage of all of these new features without having to do any code customization at all. 6.0 obviously introduced, as we talked about before, the quick layout spreadsheet grid to customize the layout. Also created many different new enhancements to the layout. So if you were previously customizing your page to have multiple columns as an example, now you are getting that out of the box effectively with multi-column record panels. Similarly, if you were customizing the pages to behave in a certain way, now some of those page types may be available in version 6.0, like, for example, our workflow pages, our web report pages, email pages, and things of that nature. Again, if you did an email code customization, 6.0 was probably you had it built in an easier way to do that customization in 6.0. 6.1 continued the quick layout enhancement effectively, and 6.2 introduced master pages, direct to ASPX generation so that you did not have to worry about the HTML. And then, of course, we added a whole bunch of additional features like security, Active Directory, Windows authentication, and so on. And then we allowed you the full page editing in the spreadsheet grid. Just want to highlight that a little bit more here, that the spreadsheet grid allows you to make all of the changes that you want to do. You have access to the entire page effectively. In any cell, you can type in any HTML, any JavaScript, any ASPX, and you can also go through and access other parts of the page by essentially accessing the page directives over here. So don't be fooled by the simplicity of the spreadsheet grid. The spreadsheet grid is very powerful in the sense that it allows you access to every part of the page that you may want to do, and anything that you want to do in regular ASPX page, whether it is embedding JavaScript or even VB script or register tags or HTML or ASPX controls directly, you can do that in the spreadsheet grid. And as I mentioned to you, version 4.x onwards, we are using the same exact code model that has existed all along in version 7.0. So that's why your code customization should migrate without any problem. I want to talk about migration philosophy because I think it does give you a picture of what we are thinking when we think about migration, and it'll help you understand our philosophy, and also it'll help you then make sure that when you migrate, your migration is as seamless as possible. So we changed our migration philosophy starting 6.0 onwards. In previous version, our philosophy was that we tried to make a best effort to migrate every page to the latest version. What that did effectively was, in some ways, it was very good because new feature got added in version 5.2, let's say. Your application, once you migrate, started using that new feature effectively immediately. That was really good. The bad part of it was basically that you had to go through and test and retest every one of those pages of your application because now a new feature has been added. Maybe it messed up the look and feel of the page. Maybe you did not want that feature. Maybe that feature was already, you had implemented it in the code customization and so on. So that's the reason why our philosophy changed basically because we decided that we would rather do it in a slightly different way where we upgrade the applications, but your existing pages are left unchanged. It's like installing, Office 2010. Office 2010 installation does not go scrounge around your entire hard disk and upgrade every one of your Office 2003 documents into Office 2010. It leaves the 2003 documents as is. They will continue to work in 2010, Word 2010, but they are still in the 2003 file format effectively in that sense. So that's what our philosophy is, starting with version 6.0, that application is upgraded, but pages are unchanged, and they will work exactly as is, and the code customizations stay intact. The only difference is that in some cases, you may not be able to modify the layout if you want to, unless you upgrade to the latest version for that particular page. Not all the pages, that particular page only. Let's say you have 1,000 pages. You want to only modify 3 of those pages. Well, there's no need for you to touch or modify or change anything in the 997 pages. Only those 3 pages you can upgrade to them, retest them, modify them, take advantage of the new features that are available, and then move on effectively from that point onwards. So that's our philosophy going forward from 6.0 onwards. This has considerably eased the pain of migration effectively that I do know that a lot of you felt with the earlier versions effectively, because a lot of things broke when we tried to kind of merge your changes with the new features into that. That was a very, very difficult thing to do, but also it created a lot of havoc effectively from earlier versions. But 6.0 onwards, it's much, much easier. Application is upgraded, but pages are unchanged and left without any changes that exist over here. So in effect, our philosophy now is called on-demand migration. On-demand migration simply means that, as I mentioned, application is migrated, everything will work, and the page layout on the specific page that you're working on requires a recreation of that page once and only once. And then you have the ability to migrate each page when you are ready. You don't have to migrate, just suck in your old application into version 7.0, continue to work, maybe add new pages, leave the other 1,000 pages as is. And I already gave you that example earlier on. And the code customization, since the code model is exactly the same, will continue to work all of the same customizations from 4.x onwards. I want to talk about proforma pages. When you do migrate, you will get essentially a set of what are called proforma pages. These are the pages that have been essentially pulled into the latest version, but they are not essentially been changed. So they are still essentially the older version pages running in version 7.0, very similar to the 2003 Word documents running in Word 2010 as an example. So these are called proforma pages. They show you what a page may look like if recreated, but that's essentially a proforma page. It's not exactly how the page looks like. If you run that page in your application, it'll be exactly how it looked like in the older version. So regardless of what it shows in the design layout, the page will continue to display and work as before. No changes in that, no difference in that. So keep that in mind when you migrate your applications. Your pages, in some cases, will be proforma pages in the design layout, and you won't be able to modify it unless you upgrade that page individually, one at a time, as and when you need it. But the rest of the pages, and even this page, until you migrate, will continue to work in your application without any changes. So what are the migration steps? As we talk about the migration steps, I want to make sure that one of the things that you do is you review the online help on migration. We have an extensive online help. Go to ironspeed.com/help, and part 9, I believe, is the online help on migration, and it goes through exactly what the changes that we have made. If you've got an application in 4.0, my recommendation is you read all of the migration help related to version 5.x, 5.1, 5.2, 5.0, 5.1, 5.2, and 6.0, 6.1, 6.2, and so on, so that you are aware of the changes that we have made effectively, and it's very important that you do that. Make sure you back up. As much as we talk about, as good as our product is, there could always be certain things that may not work properly, and you may want to go back. So it's very important that you back up. It's amazing how many times that we could get calls into support where people have essentially migrated, something does not work exactly as intended, and they don't have a backup on that one. So do back up and make sure you have that in there. And of course, as I've mentioned to you multiple times, take an inventory of changes that you have made to your standard application. You added this particular code customization, you modified this layout. It doesn't have to be extensive. What I do normally is that whenever I'm building an application, I usually maintain a Word document of the changes that I've made to the application, just as a way to keep track of things effectively on an ongoing basis. So that way I already have an inventory of the changes that I have made when I'm moving forward effectively. And then, of course, you will migrate. And then once you migrate, please review the migration notes and apply any changes, because migration notes do specify that, in some cases, and here's what we will do. You will have a standard set of pages, but you also have a number of infrastructure pages that we have created for you. These are helper pages and things like that. Like, let's say, for example, the import wizard, or the large list selector, or the export feature effectively. These pages and these features have always, new things may have been added in there. Now, so those files will be replaced. So as an example, the large list selector has gone through a number of changes, or the import wizard has gone through a number of changes. Those pages will be upgraded in your shared folder, even though your existing pages, like for example, your show customers table page, may not have changed. So I want to make sure that you understand that those pages will be migrated over to the latest version, and you may need to make any adjustments. If you customize the import wizard, obviously you may need to reapply those customizations on the import wizard on a one-time basis on that. But generally, that does not apply to your pages, meaning the pages that were created as part of your application. It only applies to the infrastructure pages, the logistical support pages effectively that we have created in your. Of course, you want to run after you migrate, and you want to verify, make sure that all of the features have been migrated over and your application is running as needed. And then later, on demand, you can recreate the pages as you need. One final comment before I go give you a demo over here is that going forward, looking into the future, there are two things, as I mentioned to you early on, that have made the underlying ability for us to migrate to be much, much easier. And we, based on these two, we think that the future migration is going to be much simpler going forward. So if you've got a version 7.0 app already, we, obviously as we release future versions, we expect your migration to be much more smoother, because the spreadsheet grid is saved, the layout changes are saved in an internal XML structure at a very granular level, at a cell level, not as HTML cell, not as HTML. So when we need to merge your changes into the existing layout, it's extremely easy for us to do that. And so that's why we hope that migration will be much easier, even easier than version 6.x and version 7.x as we go forward because of the spreadsheet grid. And same thing with formulas. Formulas are going to be preserved and are much easier to migrate. Even if we make code model changes in the future, the formulas would be much easier to migrate going forward. So with that, let me actually switch over and give a demo, and then I will take quick questions. What I have done here, I'm going to close this application here in IronSpeed Designer, and I'm going to open up an application that is in version 5.2. It was a sample app that I created that was available in version 5.2.1 called Acme OMS. Acme OMS, if you remember, is an order management system. It was based on the Southwind database, currently also based on the Southwind. But it also had a number of layout and page customizations. We always customize the add order page, the edit order page, and added code customizations related to that. So what I'm going to do is take that application and migrate it. And so I simply open it up in version 7.0. I get the migration wizard. The migration wizard gives me, make sure you review the application migration section that I mentioned to you earlier. That is the online help that deals with all of the different migration issues that we talked about, and goes through each one of the things step by step and deals with all of the previous versions and essentially what has changed. Also, make sure that you don't have multiple versions of Hierarchical Designer open with the same application. Obviously, that's going to create some problems for you. So make sure you close all other, sometimes people open the same application in multiple versions, maybe even have the old application open in the older version when you do that. So make sure you close that just so that there is no conflict there that is going on. Next step, create a backup. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to create a backup, but you should. And it tells you, what exactly is going to change. And then finally, it goes through and does the actual migration of your application, basically. And it's going to go through and delete and update and modify all of the infrastructure files, but it's going to try to preserve as many of your code customizations and your page layout changes as is. Here is a version 5.2.1 application. All code customizations have been successfully migrated. And then I just go ahead and press the next button. And here is my migration notes. These migration notes are also left in the migration notes.txt file in your application folder. So you can always go back and review it. The most support cases that we deal with migration have to do with people not following through on these migration notes. They haven't reviewed the migration notes and said, I lost such and such thing, or, oh, I don't, what happened to such and such thing? Well, here are the migration notes where we try to give you a picture of all of the changes that we have made and what are the things that you may need to make changes to. So let's say, for example, you made style sheet changes. Well, guess what? The themes have been upgraded. These are some of the infrastructure or logistical files that I talked about earlier. You will have to add those style changes back again into the styles files here. So those are the changes that are still needed, but generally those pages, the rest of your application should be just fine. So make sure you follow through on each one of these migration notes and check them off. You can basically compare them with your inventory and you should be fine. Go ahead and press finish, and now you'll be able to build and essentially run. Notice the performer page that I mentioned to you about. This is how the performer page looks like, the spreadsheet grid. Now you cannot modify things over here because this is a performer page. If you do modify, it gives you a message saying that, hey, listen, you may have to upgrade this thing and this page. I'm just going to cancel it. I'm just going to go ahead and build and run, and then as it comes up, I'll start reviewing the questions and take your questions. So that's the formal part of the presentation. I'll be glad to take all of your questions over here. I noticed that you have been busy and have already logged in about 10 or 12 questions over here, but do keep them coming, and let's talk about that here. Richard R. is asking, so let's just wait for this application to come up, and then I will answer these questions. So here is the Acme OMS application that hopefully you see it on your screen. It should come up, and what you will notice in the application is that a number of layout customizations that were in 5.2.1. Obviously, Hierarchical Designer did not generate an application with all of these fields in this one column effectively, right? Because that's not how the standard one is. So somebody had gone in and modified that layout. And in the 5.2.1, remember, it was modified in the old HTML editor. It was not modified in the spreadsheet grid, but we still preserved it. We still preserved it exactly as is and are displaying that to you in that format effectively. Similarly, if I press the Add button, you get the Add Orders page. And again, the Add Orders page was hand-customized in the HTML editor not in the spreadsheet grid in 5.21, and you will see that it is preserved exactly as is without any problem over here. I also had some code customizations that as I selected, philo mix, for example, it went ahead and pulled the unit price effectively. If I typed in quantity, it calculated the extended price. That was a code customization that was done previously. Obviously, it's much easier to do in version 7.0 because of formulas, but you can see the code customization is preserved as is. The layout customization is preserved as is. So that's what I wanted to demonstrate to you very quickly as we go forward. Okay, so Richard R. is asking, can you do apps from version 5.x and earlier? It sounds like migration from 6.x are likely to be more simple. Richard, absolutely migration from 6.x is likely to be more simple, but as I just demonstrated to you here, version 5.x applications will also be able to migrate without any problem because the code model is the same, that we preserve the layout exactly as it is from version 5.x. When you need to migrate to when you need to modify that particular page, you will have to do a one-time recreation of that particular page only and not the entire application. So that's why we call that on-demand migration. Certainly version 6.x is going to be much, much simpler for you, but 5.x is also fairly simple for you. It's the version 3 that we worry about because in that case we advise you to migrate, to recreate the application. Anthony is asking, will RSP Designer support SharePoint 2010, both Foundation, the next version of WSS 3.0, and MOS? MOS is Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. Anthony, this is not a migration-related question, but I will answer it for you. Yes, RSP Designer will support SharePoint 2010. It is currently in QA right now. We have already added support for SharePoint 2010 and Visual Studio 2010. It is currently in QA, and a few weeks away, as soon as our QA group gives us the go-ahead. We don't release any software before its time in terms of approval from QA. So that's what it's going through, and we'll have that shortly. You can create SharePoint 2007 apps today, and they will migrate over to SharePoint 2010, so you can continue to build that. Our philosophy generally for adding support for new releases of Microsoft products is in approximately 90 days after their release. So that's just so for your future consideration. John is asking, does V7 have features that allow creation of customized hierarchical menu structures? Absolutely. V7.0 has the ability for you to create customized hierarchical menu structure. So if you go back in here, let me go back and open up the other application that I was working in so I can show you the menu structure effectively. I can go through and bring up the menu wizard, and I have the default menu, and I can do a variety of things. For example, if I want to take this employees entire folder and make it as a subfolder of categories, I can just do that. So here it is. I have 3 levels, and then of course now I can take products and move it somewhere under employees completely over here, and so now I've got 4 levels deep effectively. Categories, employees, products, and so on. I can just go ahead and press this here, build and run, and so that's easy for me to essentially create effectively a menu structure in a very deep hierarchy. So if I did not understand your question correctly, please ask me again. Be glad to answer that. Stephen Wright is asking, with the removal of HTML pages, is it possible to develop a page within my application which I can create, for example, a list of 5 hyperlinked headings which can, when clicked, or will take you further down that page to an area which contains a paragraph of text which relates to the heading you have clicked on? Stephen, so basically what you're asking is effectively, can you create a custom page or custom thing effectively, right? And the answer is absolutely you can. Absolutely you have the ability, because at the end of the day, the HTML, the spreadsheet grid gives you access to everything that you need. And I'll demonstrate that to you in a minute, but let me just finish the menu thing over here. Notice how how 4-level deep menu that I created over here, from categories to employees to products effectively over here. Okay, going back to Stephen's question over here is how can I essentially application where I can create, for example, is the 5 hyperlinked headings, which will take you further down that page to an area contains a paragraph of text which relates to the heading you have clicked on. Effectively, you are talking about an anchor tag, effectively, Stephen. That's what it's called, an anchor tag. And I don't remember the exact syntax, but it's like pound. When you do an href, you do a pound, effectively, into that. I may have to search it myself, href anchor tag. I think it is, if I remember right, you just put a pound on it, but I don't remember exactly how you, there you go, point B, but how do you define the anchor tag effectively? Href is the anchor tag. Oh, I define it as an A name effectively. So what you have to do is put an A name effectively at different tags and then effectively put that over here. So let's say, for example, I'm on this show customer stable page effectively, right? But I go in effectively and let's take, I go back to the higher level, zoom out to the higher level effectively. I'm over here and I put in a, these are tips, okay? And then now let me go to the next anchor tag over here someplace and put in tips 2. These are second tips. And then I go over here, put copy, and I put tips 3 over here, and these are third tips. Now I can then go back, insert a new cell at the top, new row above here, and then I can put in 3 different things basically, right? href equal tips, sorry, pound tips, and what is it? First tip, and then I can repeat that. I'll just put a space NBSP here, NBSP here, and then I'll put tips 2 and tips 3, and then I can do, second and third. Now, the reason why I went through this much detail just to answer Stephen's question is I wanted to make sure that you understand that in the cell editor, you can essentially type in any HTML, any JavaScript, any VB script, any ASPX that you wanted. There's nothing that's stopping you from doing that, and be able to display that very easily here. So that's how easy it is for you to do that. And hopefully once it comes up, I can show you how that looks like. Okay. James is asking, while this is coming up, so there you go. I've got, first tip, second tip, third tip over here. Now, in this particular case, I may have to shorten my browser over here just to see it jumping to this thing. I can click to second tip, and it goes to the second tip. I can go back, click the third tip, and it goes to the third tip effectively. Now, obviously, in this particular case, there's not a whole lot of things over here. So I click on the first tip, it goes on the first tip over here. So that's how easy it is for you to add the different tags and make them available as you needed them. James is asking, in version 5, I was very easily able to create a link that redirects my users to our company intranet anytime they click on our company logo. I'm struggling to find out how to make that work in version 7. Very frustrating. Can you show me? You've got a logo effectively, and you want to effectively display it as a link effectively, right? So going back to IronSpeed Designer, let's go. The logo is now in a header page in your master page effectively. So in this case, it's a vertical menu. Here is my page header effectively. If I zoom inside the page header, actually, where is my page header? Oh, okay. My page header is going to be on my header over here, and here's my logo effectively that comes over here, right? Now, I can essentially surround this entire logo effectively with an ahref tag. So there's nothing stopping me from essentially doing something like this effectively, where I can say http://ironspeed.com, and then effectively I put the href here. There are many ways of doing it, but here's one way of doing it. And I think basically now I save and run. Hopefully that should work. So that's how easy it is for you to do that. There are a couple of other ways of doing it, but for the purpose of this thing, that's fine. You can in fact just create a link and put in HTML. You can even put instead of the gen:: image, you could do it with your own logo image source equal as an example there as well. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So here's my logo, and if I click on it, notice at the status bar at the bottom over here, I show www.ironspeed.com. I click over here, it goes to IronSpeed basically. So that's how easy it is for you to do that. So again, to go back and review this thing, all we did was we surrounded the logo with an href tag effectively. There are a few other ways, but I won't go into that for the time being. John is asking, I've made many layout changes to my V6.2 app in which I shifted field positions around. When I migrate to V7, will I have to redo these layout changes? John, the answer is no. You do not have to do these layout changes if you do not want to modify that particular page. If you want to leave that page as is, no problem. Leave them as is. Your page will continue to work in version 7.0 without any changes. In Designer, it'll show up as a pro forma page, so that in case you want to change the layout of that particular page, it'll recreate that page, and then you will have to reapply those layout changes on that one time only, because of the way that we are saving that thing. Now, most of the time, what you will see is that even version 6.2 pages will be able to migrate over to version 7.0 without actually requiring a pro forma page. In terms of working, they will work without any problem. So the only time you will need to reapply those changes is if you want to change the layout of that particular page. Otherwise, leave those pages as is, and they'll continue to work. Edward is asking, you build the 7.0 migrated app in the 5.2 file directory. What is the correct way to move an app to a new directory? Actually, what I did, to be honest with you, Edward, is I copied it from my 5.2 directory, sample applications directory, over to that particular directory. So that application, earlier before I started the webinar, I just took an entire folder and copied it over. So there is no requirement that an application is resident in any particular directory. You could put it in any directory that you want. There is no requirement that we impose on it effectively. You see, that's why it's called a virtual directory when you're actually running it in IIS. You can call the application Acme OMS, and it may be resident in a folder called c:/my app, as in for all we care effectively. It doesn't really matter. So the correct way to move an app is go to Windows Explorer, copy the entire folder to a new directory, and that's the extent of it. There's nothing magic about that. Syed is asking, what to expect of IronSpeed in the next 6 months? Will there be a newer versions introduced? Syed, you can bet on the fact that there will be newer versions introduced because we are always working on new and exciting things here. On our website, we have a roadmap thing here. So let me go through here and say, where can I find the roadmap over here? Product roadmap. My suggestion is you review the product roadmap and you can see exactly the kind of things that we are working on. So we talk about reporting and charting. We talk about SharePoint support. We talk about audit trail, and so on, and new page types and so on effectively. So go ahead and read that. We're always upgrading new versions. Any living and breathing product, for example, will always be adding new things. Whether it will be released in 6 months, or whether it will be released in 3 months, or whether it will be released in 9 months, I can't guarantee you that thing. But nevertheless, the point is still the same thing, which is that we're always working on new versions, and we will. The product roadmap is the right place. We are also interested in hearing your suggestions. So if there are things that you're looking for, make sure you go to the forum in the feature request area and post it there. Our best ideas come from customers like you and others which tell us, hey, what about this? What about that? That's where we get our ideas. That's how we add new features. So please go ahead and provide us feedback on that one. OA is asking, can you please review how to leave all pages unchanged in the migration step and later change just a page? OA, the bottom line is that there is nothing special you have to do to leave the pages unchanged. They will be left unchanged. Only on your case-by-case basis, you can migrate each page individually. When you simply migrate, the pages will be left unchanged. There is no feature to say, change my pages. No such thing exists. So when you migrate, your pages will be left unchanged. Don't worry about it. And then later on, individually, you can go ahead and make the changes on an as-needed basis here. We are coming to the top of the hour. It's 8:57 here in California. I still have about 4 or 5 questions. I will stay as long as you have questions and answer them for you. So those that have to leave, there is no other formal part of the presentation over here. But I will answer all of your questions. So if you send me questions, I'll be glad to stay on and answer them. OA is asking again, in my migrated application to V7.0.2, where do I find the current values of variables on a page? For instance, I can't access the values of my customer ID and customer name on my Add Customer page. How do I get to these? OA, I'm trying to understand your question, so let me read it again. In my migrated application to V7.0.2, where do I find the current values of variables on a page? When you talk about variables, you're talking about controls most likely, because there's no such thing as variables on a page. For instance, I can't access the values of my customer ID and customer name on my Add Customer page. How do I get to these? OA, I'm not sure I understand the context of where you are trying to access the values. Are you trying to access the values in the code behind, on the page's code behind, or on the controls file? Are you trying to access it in the formulas? Could you please elaborate on your question, and I'll be glad to answer them for you. Nicholas is asking, I'm having some issues migrating code customizations from an application that was originally written in 5.x and is now in 6.2. Should I try to migrate from the older 5.x version? Nicholas, not necessarily. Whether you migrate from 5.x or 6.2 of a previously migrated application, it'll probably be identical. So if you're having some issues with my code migrations, I would like to understand what those issues are, and we may be able to address them. So if you've got support, make sure you open up a support case, and we'll try to address that. If not, post it on the forum, and we do occasionally monitor that. We don't necessarily review all of the forum posts, and occasionally we monitor that, and we might be able to help you with that. But if you can just give a general thing on that, we can certainly try to do that. But if you have support, do open up a case, or ask me a follow-up question here in this webinar. If you can give me the more specific details about what exactly are the problem that you're having, and I'll see if I can answer that. John is asking, does V7 have features that allow a Windows Forms app to run inside of a panel that is part of an ISP-generated page? John, no, there's no such feature in Ironsuite Designer to run a Windows app inside of a panel. Not only does the Ironsuite Designer have a page, you will not find any other tool that will allow you to run a Windows app inside of any panel in a browser, for the simple reason of security. When you are running a Windows Forms app, you're running it from a local machine. When you're running a web application, it's running on the server effectively. So this feature is not something that we can even support effectively, because that's essentially a huge security concern. In effect, essentially people can hijack your machine, because a Windows app certainly has more, in terms of more, what should I say, more permissions effectively to access and do many things. In a Windows app, I can delete your directory, for example, right, without even asking you. But on a web application, I cannot delete your directory. I cannot even access the C:" thing, basically, for sitting from a server. So OA is asking the clarifying or set a clarifying thing. I'm trying to get to the customer ID and customer name in the code behind so that I could use the values in the controls, say after a save operation. OA, here's my recommendation for you. I would suggest what you go is you go to the knowledge base and search for tutorial. Okay? And when you search for tutorial, the first link that will come up is the code customization tutorial. Read this code customization tutorial. 10 minutes of reading will answer all of your questions. The reason why I say that to drive you to the thing over here is because we do provide you help here in terms of how to access each one of the controls later on. So once you basically, let me see if I can find that section over here. See, there you go, referencing page controls in code. So we'll give you essentially that. So go ahead and review this section called referencing page controls in a code, and you'll be able to see exactly what you're trying to do. Nothing has changed in this area from version 4.x, 5.x, 6.x, or 7.x. It's exactly the same thing. Version 3.x was different. So I encourage you to read this section. That's probably my best thing that I can provide to you at this point in time. Stephen is asking, in V7, can you manually size the pages so that only display a certain amount of pixels width on screen? Stephen, yes, you can, but I don't remember how to. Knowledge base is my biggest thing. Set application page width. Maybe this is, so go ahead and take a look at this one. Set application page width, and this is how you can go ahead and specify that. So go ahead and take a look at that. This will modify it for your entire application, but certainly you can also apply this same thing for an individual page. So we go through kind of alternative approaches, but more flexible solution. Knowledge base is your best help in that case. Messiality, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I would want to know if you could demonstrate how interfaces for SharePoint lists and applications can be created and integrated. Messiality, I do not have we do not currently support a SharePoint list directly in RSP Designer, so I cannot demonstrate that to you. This is something that we're looking into for future, but currently I don't have an example to show you because we do not directly support SharePoint lists, meaning the ability to access essentially SharePoint lists directly within a web application here. So I'm not sure I can really give you a demonstration at this point in time. Messiality is also asking, why should I migrate to V7? What are the benefits and new features found in version 7? I think I covered this early on. I mentioned to you that there are two game-changing features of version 7. The layout customizations are much easier with the spreadsheet grid, and the code customizations are mostly eliminated with the formulas. But I also encourage you to go back to our website here and review the version history page and the release notes, basically. So if you go to the version history page and go to release notes, or actually feature list effectively over here, you will see exactly the set of features that we have added in version 7.0, and we talk about how those features make your life much easier in terms of developing the application. So this is the more detailed version, but let me assure you that the two most important features in version 7 is the enhanced spreadsheet grid and the new formulas here. So last call for questions. I don't have any more questions here. Anything from your end? I'll wait for a minute or two. In the meantime, if there are no more questions, let me talk about the start page in your application. Please review this on a regular basis. This is where we advertise all of our upcoming webinars. We have webinars almost multiple times a week, dealing with all kinds of basic topics as well as advanced topics. So do review this thing and make sure that you can join us for anything that you are interested in, any of those things, as long as you have a current maintenance subscription in place, especially for the advanced topics in here. So any more questions, Brooke? I guess one more question on its way, so I'll wait for that and answer that. All right, so question from Nicholas, a little bit more specific about my migration questions from earlier. I'm having issues due to the changes in base application page, base application table control, and base application record control. I'm guessing that I'll have to modify my added code. Thanks for your help. Nicholas, most of the time, base application page, base application table control, and base application record control will be copied over or replaced whenever migration happens, because these are the underlying logistical support or infrastructure pages. And that's why if you modified, and this is why I said read the migration notes, because the migration notes will give you a more detailed description about the base application page and the base application table control and record control over here. But you will have to reapply those changes in those infrastructure files whenever you're migrating, because we always add new features and functionality in those files. So I would suggest to you that you reapply those code changes. But if you're still having problems, do open up a support case and we can take a look at that and guide you specifically on that one. Ty is asking, any real time frame for Visual Studio 2010 support? Ty, we cannot really predict releases because we want to go through a QA cycle over here. But we are looking at it in a matter of weeks here. So hopefully it's anywhere somewhere in a few weeks to a month or two out, basically, is what I can tell you. But it could be earlier, but I cannot predict because QA is always the ultimate arbiter of our releases effectively. So it is in QA right now. It is development complete, and it does take some amount of time in order for us to QA. Keep in mind that we have to verify. You would not believe how many platforms and how many combinations we have to verify in terms of every new release. We have to go through verification of all versions of Visual Studio that we support, all versions of .NET we support, all of the languages, VB.NET, C#, web application, website, web application for SharePoint, stored procedures, inline, all of the different versions of Windows, including 64-bit and 32-bit, Vistas, XP 7, Server 2003, Server 2008, and so on and so forth. So the sheer number of combinatorial explosion of the various combinations that we have in terms of testing and verification are enormous, so that you don't have to worry about it at the other end. So that's what we're working on, and it is in QA right now, and hopefully we'll get it out as soon as possible. Edward is asking, maybe off topic, can you develop in a single language and add 4 or 5 more? Absolutely, Edward. You can add multiple languages application later on without any problem. So you can have an English language app, and then you can go back and add German, and then you can add French, and you can add Russian, and so on and so forth without any problem. The only thing that you have to be careful about when you're developing international applications is that right to left and left to right cannot be in the same application. Because the look and feel is entirely different effectively. So you just have to develop 2 different applications for right to left and left to right. But if they are all left to right languages, then effectively you can add as many languages as possible without any problem. Okay, so I think that was the last question that I had. So thank you so much for joining. Please do review the start page on a regular basis for all of the new things that we offer, and look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.